In class, we've talked about how authors have a reason for writing the way they do. It's not just by mistake. So the question today is, why did Shakespeare write Macbeth the way he did? This is because the plot couldn't be changed from what it is now, because that would in some way alter the message he's trying to get across to the readers. This message that he would be conveying to readers is called the moral of the story. And I believe that he was trying to say to his readers that they should stand up for what they believe is right, and they can't let someone talk them into doing something that they don't agree with. There are possible variances to the plot and the story, and these are some of them that I thought of when I was reading, and I will discuss why they couldn't change to this. So the first one that I thought of was, what if Lady Macbeth was the killer? Second one is, what if Lady Macbeth had advised her husband not to kill Duncan? And the third one is, what if Macbeth had killed Banquo's son instead of Banquo? Okay, so right now we will be talking about the number one point I have listed here. What if Lady Macbeth was the killer in the story? Now we'll go to page 357 in our textbooks. This is from Act 1, Scene 7. The reason Shakespeare couldn't have changed this, he couldn't have had Lady Macbeth be the killer, is because if Lady Macbeth was the killer, then Shakespeare would have never had the opportunity to form a situation where someone was given the chance to stand up for what they believe in. Here we see person versus person conflict throughout this entire page, where Lady Macbeth and Macbeth are arguing. Lady Macbeth seems crazy and really evil. She's trying to get Macbeth to commit this murder. And see, in line 45, Macbeth says, "Prithee peace, I dare do all that may become a man, who dares do more is none." After that, Lady Macbeth says, starting in line 48, "What beast was then that made you break this enterprise to me? When you durst do it, then you were a man, and to be more than what you were, you would be so much more the man." Right here we see that they have two different viewpoints on that. Lady Macbeth is saying that her husband is less of a man if he doesn't kill Duncan. Therefore, she's trying to manipulate him into doing something that he clearly doesn't want to do. Eventually, we know that Macbeth falls down to what his wife is saying, and he kills Duncan on page 363, line 46. He says, "And on thy blade and dungeon gouts of blood," which means he finally committed the murder. Basically, all of this shows that if Lady Macbeth had killed Duncan herself, Shakespeare would have never presented an opportunity to the readers that somebody had the chance to stand up for what they believe in. If Lady Macbeth had been the murderer, nobody would have ever had to have been manipulated. She already wanted to do it, which means that Shakespeare wouldn't be able to back up his moral of the story. The plot would change too much. And now for the second point, Lady Macbeth advising her husband not to kill Duncan. We know that Macbeth doesn't want to murder Duncan because of his argument with his wife on page 357. His wife's cruelty and ability to manipulate her husband was a crucial part in Shakespeare being able to set up the storyline so Macbeth would kill Duncan. Because Macbeth was genuinely a good guy, Shakespeare used Macbeth's wife to push him over the edge and help paint the picture that would support his moral of the story. If Shakespeare would have had Lady Macbeth tell her husband not to commit the murder, then Macbeth would have definitely not done it. So on page 357, lines 40 and 41, right here, Lady Macbeth says, "To be the same in thine own act and valor art thou, as thou art in desire." She's basically saying here, you only desire things, but you won't do what it takes to achieve it. This is trying to get him to understand that, sure, he might want to be king, but unless he actually kills Duncan, it'll never happen. Then on page 358, which is still Act 1, Scene 7, line 79, you see that Macbeth says, "I am settled and bend up, each corporal agent to this terrible feat. Away and mock the time with fairest show. False face must hide what the false heart doth know." This is when Macbeth finally agrees to kill Duncan. You can see that his wife's tactics have finally affected him, and he's decided that he's going to kill Duncan. The reason Lady Macbeth couldn't have told her husband not to kill Duncan is because the plot would change too much. And once again, Shakespeare wouldn't have been able to show Lady Macbeth manipulated her husband, or how Macbeth didn't stand up for what he believed in, because Macbeth would have never considered killing Duncan. Lady Macbeth telling him to commit the murder was the whole basis behind Shakespeare's purpose in writing Macbeth, showing that someone can have power to manipulate another person, and if that person doesn't stand up for what they believe in, they'll get themselves into trouble. Now for the third point, Macbeth killing Banquo's son instead of Banquo. We will go to page 347, line 67, right here. This is the part where the witches are giving Macbeth and Banquo their prophecy about their future. And right now the witch is talking to Banquo, and she says, "Thou shalt get kings, though thou be none. So all hail Macbeth and Banquo." By that sentence, she's just saying that Banquo, you won't be a king, but you will have sons that will. This doesn't settle well with Macbeth, because knowing that his prophecy comes true and he is king, eventually he gets really paranoid and he wants to do something about that, because if Banquo has sons that'll be king, and then Macbeth will lose his spot as king. The way Macbeth wants to solve this is by murdering Banquo. So we'll go to page 381. Where in line 115 Macbeth says, "So is he mine, and in such bloody distance that every minute of his being thrusts against my nearest of life. And though I could with bare-faced power sweep him from my sight and bid my will avouch, yet I must not, for certain friends that are both his and mine, whose loves I may not drop, but will wail his fall, who I myself struck down, and thence it is that I to your assistance do make love, making the business from the common eye, for sundry weighty reasons." Then the murderer responds, "We shall, my lord, perform what you command us." Here we see Macbeth telling the murderers that Banquo is an enemy and that he needs him dead, but he can't do it himself, so he's hiring them to murder Banquo for him. And Shakespeare used this scenario to show that because Macbeth didn't stand up for what he believed in originally with his wife, that now Macbeth is in a web of lies and must kill his best friend in order to keep things going. If Macbeth would have killed Banquo's son, then that wouldn't have been dramatic enough to have an effect on the readers, because Banquo's son wasn't nearly as close to Macbeth as Banquo was. So by having Macbeth kill Banquo, he just dramatized the whole situation and backed up the moral of the story, gave it more meaning to the readers.